ओके फ्रेंड्स, तो हम नेक्स्ट चैप्टर को स्टार्ट करते हैं जो कि चैप्टर 12 है और ये वाटर या ओशंस के बारे में है। कैन यू थिंक ऑफ लाइफ विदाउट वाटर? डेफिनेटली नॉट. इट इज सेड दैट द वाटर इज लाइफ. Water is an essential component of all life forms that exist over the surface of the earth. The creatures on the earth are lucky that it is a water planet. Otherwise, we all would have no existence. Water is a rare commodity in our solar system. There is no water on the sun or anywhere else in the solar system. The earth fortunately has an abundant supply of water on its surface. Hence, our planet is called the blue planet. Now, hydrological cycle. Water is a cyclic resource. It can be used and reused. Water also undergoes a cycle from the ocean to land and land to ocean. The hydrological cycle describes the movement of water on, in, and above the earth. The water cycle has been working for billions. तो ये याद रखना, जो हाइड्रोलॉजिकल साइकिल है क्या करता है कि describes the movement of water on, in and above the earth. On, in and above the earth, ये थ्री प्रीपोजिशन याद रखना. हो सकता है एग्जाम में आपको मदद हो जाए, कभी क्वेश्चन पूछ ले जाए, ठीक है, घुमा फिरा के कोई स्टेटमेंट दे दे तो. द वाटर साइकिल हैज बीन वर्किंग फॉर बिलियंस of years and all the life on the earth depends on it. Next to air, water is the most important element required for the existence of life on earth. The distribution of water on earth is quite uneven. Many locations have plenty of water while others have very limited quantity. The hydrological cycle is the circulation of water within the earth's hydrosphere in different forms, that is the liquid, solid and the gaseous phases. It also refers to the continuous exchange of water between the oceans. Now, components and processes of the water cycle. So components and processes, so water storage in oceans, processes evaporation, evapotranspiration, sublimation, water in the atmosphere. Components, processes क्या, condensation, precipitation. Water storage in the ice and snow, there is snow melt, runoff to streams, surface runoff, stream flow, fresh water storage, infiltration, groundwater storage, groundwater discharge, springs. So processes and components and processes of the water cycle. क्या बोला पता नहीं है, चलो इसको लीव करते हैं. हम देखते हैं कि it also refers to the continuous exchange of water between the oceans, atmosphere, land surface and subsurface and the organisms. About 71% of the planetary water is found in the oceans. The remaining is held as fresh water in glaciers and ice caps, groundwater sources, lakes, soil moisture, atmosphere, streams and within life. Nearly 59% of the water that falls on land returns to the atmosphere through evaporation from over the oceans as well as from other places. The remainder runs up on the surface, infiltrates into the ground, or a part of it becomes a glacier. It is to be noted that the renewable water on the earth is constant while the demand is increasing tremendously. This leads to water crisis in different parts of the world, spatially and temporally. Okay, the pollution of river waters has further aggravated the crisis. How can you intervene in improving the water quality and augmenting the available quantity of water? Relief of the ocean floor. The oceans are confined to the great depressions of the Earth's outer layer. In this section, we shall see the nature of the ocean basins of the Earth and their topography. The oceans, unlike the continents, merge so naturally into one another that it is hard to demarcate them. The geographers have divided the oceanic part of the Earth into 5 oceans, namely Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, Southern Ocean and the Arctic. The various seas, bays, gulfs and other inlets are parts of these 4 large oceans. A major portion, 4 क्यों बोला ये, हमारा तो 5 है, पैसिफिक, अटलांटिक, इंडियन और देखो साउदर्न ओशन एंड आर्कटिक है, फिर 4 क्यों बोला पता नहीं. A major portion of the ocean floor is found between 3 to 6 kilometers below the sea level. The land under the waters of the oceans, that is the ocean floor, exhibits complex and varied features as those observed over the land. Okay, the floors of the oceans are rugged with the world's largest mountain ranges, deepest trenches and the largest plains. These features are formed like those of the continents by the factors of tectonic, volcanic and depositional processes. Now, divisions of the ocean floor. The ocean floors can be divided into 4 major divisions: the continental shelf, the continental slope, the deep sea plain, the oceanic dips Besides these divisions, there are also major and minor relief features in the ocean floors like ridges, hills, seamounts, gyres, trenches, canyons, etc. Continental shelf. The continental shelf is the extended margin of each continent occupied by relatively shallow seas and gulfs. It is the shallowest part of the ocean, showing an average gradient of 1 or even less. The shelf typically ends at a very steep slope called the shelf break. The width of the continental shelves vary from one ocean to another. The average width of continental shelves is about 80 km. The shelves are almost absent or very narrow along some of the margins like the coasts of Chile, the west coast of Sumatra, etc. On the contrary, the Siberian shelf in the Arctic Ocean, the largest in the world, stretches to 1500 km in width. The depth of the shelves also varies. It may be as shallow as 30 meters in some areas, while in some areas it is as deep as 600 meters. The continental shelves are covered with variable thicknesses of sediments brought down by rivers, glaciers, wind from the land, and distributed by waves and currents. Massive sedimentary deposits received over the long time by the continental shelves become the source of fossil fuels. ये फॉसिल फ्यूल्स कैसे बनते हैं पता है आपको कि जब क्या है सेडिमेंटरी रॉक्स में कोई दब जाता है लिविंग मैटर्स तो वहाँ से बनता है ना फॉसिल फ्यूल्स हमारा. The continental slope connects the continental shelf and the ocean basins. It begins where the bottom of the continental shelf sharply drops off into a steep slope. The gradient of the slope region varies between 2 to 5. तो ये याद रखना, the gradient of the continental slope varies between 2 to 5 degree. The depth of the slope region varies from 200 to 3000 मीटर. ये भी याद रखना कि जो डेप्थ है वो है कितना है 200 to 3000 मीटर होता है. The slope boundary indicates the end of the continents. Canyons and trenches are observed in this region. Now deep sea plain. Deep sea plains are gently sloping areas of the ocean basins. These are the flattest and smoothest regions of the world. The depths vary between 3000 and 6000 meter. These plains are covered with fine-grained sediments like clay and silt. Oceanic dips or trenches. These areas are the deepest parts of the oceans. The trenches are relatively steep-sided, narrow basins. They are some 3 to 5 km deeper than the surrounding ocean floor. They occur at the basis of continental slopes and along island arcs and are associated with active volcanoes and strong earthquakes. That is why they are very significant in the study of plate movements. As many as 57 deeps have been explored as so far, of which 32 are in the Pacific Ocean, 19 in the Atlantic Ocean and 6 in the Indian Ocean. Minor relief features. Apart from the above mentioned major relief features of the ocean floor, some minor but significant features predominate in different parts of the oceans. Mid-ocean ridges. A mid-oceanic ridge is composed of two chains of mountains separated by a large depression. The mountain range can have peaks as high as 2500 meters and some even reach above the ocean surface. Iceland, a part of mid-Atlantic ridge, is an example. तो आइसलैंड एक्चुअली क्या है, मिड ओशन रीज का पार्ट है और स्पेसिफिकली मिड अटलांटिक रीज का पार्ट है. नाउ सी माउंट. इट इज अ माउंटेन विथ पॉइंटेड समिट्स राइजिंग फ्रॉम द सी फ्लोर दैट डज नॉट रीच द सरफेस ऑफ द ओशन. तो सी माउंट से ये भी माउंटेन है बट सरफेस को रीच नहीं करते. अब मिड ओशन रीज जो है सरफेस में आ सकते हैं, जैसे कि हमारा आइसलैंड आ गया है. Now sea mounts are volcanic in origin. These can be 3000 to 4000 meter tall. The Emperor Seamount, an extension of the Hawaiian island in the Pacific Ocean, is a good example. Now submarine canyons. These are deep valleys, some comparable to the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River. They are sometimes found cutting across the continental shelves and slopes, often extending from the mouths of large rivers. The Hudson Canyon is the best known submarine canyon in the world. Now gyres. It is a flat-topped seamount. They show evidences of gradual subsidence through stages to become flat-topped submerged mountains. It is estimated that more than 10,000 seamounts and gyres exist in the Pacific Ocean alone. Atoll. These are low islands found in the tropical oceans consisting of coral reefs surrounding a central depression. It may be a part of the sea, lagoon, or sometimes form enclosing a body of fresh brackish or highly saline water. Temperature of ocean waters. This section deals with the spatial and vertical distribution of temperature in various oceans. Ocean waters get heated up by the solar energy just as land. The process of heating and cooling of the oceanic water is slower than land. Factors affecting temperature distribution. The factors which affect the distribution of temperature of ocean water are latitude. The temperature of surface water decreases from the equator towards the poles because the amount of insolation decreases poleward. Unequal distribution of land and water. The oceans in the northern hemisphere receive more heat due to their contact with larger extent of land than the oceans in the southern hemisphere. Prevailing wind. The winds blowing from the land towards the oceans drive warm surface water away from the coast, resulting in the upwelling of cold water from below. It results into the longitudinal variation in the temperature. Contrary to this, the onshore winds pile up warm water near the coast and this raises the temperature. Ocean currents. Warm ocean currents raise the temperature in cold areas while the cold currents decreases the temperature in warm ocean areas. Gulf Stream warm current raises the temperature near the eastern coast of North America and the west coast of Europe, while the Labrador current cold current lowers the temperature near the northeast coast of North America. All these factors influence the temperature of the ocean currents locally. The enclosed seas in the low latitudes record relatively higher temperature than the open seas, whereas the enclosed seas in the high latitudes have lower temperature than the open seas. Horizontal and vertical distribution of temperature. The temperature depth profile for the ocean water shows how the temperature decreases with the increasing depth. The profile shows a boundary region between the surface waters of the ocean and the deeper layers. The boundary usually begins around 100 to 400 meters below the sea surface and extends several hundred of meters downward. This boundary region from where there is a rapid decrease of temperature is called the thermocline. ठीक है, तो thermocline क्या करते हैं? The boundary region from where there is a rapid decrease of temperature is called a thermocline. About 90% of the total volume of water is found below the thermocline in the deep ocean. In this zone temperatures approach 0 डिग्री सेल्सियस. तो thermocline जोन में टेम्परेचर 0 डिग्री में रीच हो जाता है और यहाँ पर 90% of the total volume of water is found below the thermocline. ठीक है. Now, the temperature structure of oceans over middle and low latitudes can be described as a three-layer system from surface to the bottom. The first layer represents the top layer of warm oceanic water and it is about 500 meters thick with temperatures ranging between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius. This layer within the tropical region is present throughout the year, but in middle latitudes it develops only during summer. The second layer, called the thermocline layer, lies below the first layer and is characterized by rapid decrease in temperature with increasing depth. The thermocline is 500 to 1000 meters thick. The third layer is very cold and extends up to the deep ocean floor. In the Arctic and Antarctic circles, the surface water temperatures are close to 0 degrees Celsius and so the temperature change with the depth is very slight. Here only one layer of cold water exists which extends from surface to deep ocean floor. देखो थर्मोक्लाइन को दिखाया गया कि अप टू जो है मतलब 1000 मीटर से के नीचे से हमारा जो है थर्मोक्लाइन स्टार्ट हो जाता है और ये 5 to 1000 ठीक है 250 to 1000 दिखाया गया है लगभग. तो इसका डेप्थ क्या है थर्मोक्लाइन का अगर पूछे तो यहाँ पर कुछ मेंशन था ना. हाँ, तो थर्मोक्लाइन इज 500 to 1000 किलोमीटर थिक यानी 500 मीटर थिक. द सेकेंड लेयर एंड इट इज द सेकेंड लेयर. ओके, थर्मोक्लाइन के नीचे जो है थर्ड लेयर है. यहाँ पर टेम्परेचर हमेशा 0 ही रहता है और उससे ज़्यादा नहीं कमते हैं ना. हियर ओनली वन लेयर ऑफ कोल्ड वाटर एग्जिस्ट विच एक्सटेंड्स फ्रॉम सरफेस टू डीप ओशन फ्लोर. इसकी बात कर रही है थर्ड लेयर. द एवरेज टेम्परेचर ऑफ सरफेस वाटर ऑफ द ओशन इज अबाउट 27 डिग्री सेल्सियस. ये भी याद रखने वाली बात है कि एवरेज टेम्परेचर ऑफ द सरफेस वाटर इज 27 डिग्री सेल्सियस एंड इट ग्रेजुअली डिक्रीजेज फ्रॉम द इक्वेटर टुवर्ड्स द पोल्स. द रेट ऑफ डिक्रीज ऑफ टेम्परेचर विथ इंक्रीजिंग लैटिट्यूड इज जनरली 0.5 डिग्री सेल्सियस पर लैटिट्यूड. तो ये भी देखो याद रखो कि 0.5 डिग्री सेल्सियस पर लैटिट्यूड जो है टेम्परेचर डिक्रीज होता है फ्रॉम इक्वेटर टुवर्ड्स द पोल. द एवरेज टेम्परेचर इज अराउंड 22 डिग्री सेल्सियस एट 20 डिग्री लैटिट्यूड्स, 14 डिग्री सेल्सियस एट 40 डिग्री लैटिट्यूड्स एंड 0 डिग्री सेल्सियस नियर द पोल्स. The oceans in the northern hemisphere record relatively higher temperature than in the southern hemisphere. The highest temperature is not recorded at the equator but slightly towards north of it. The average annual temperatures for the northern and southern hemisphere are around 19 degrees Celsius and 16 degrees Celsius respectively. This variation is due to the unequal distribution of land and water in the northern and southern hemispheres. Figure 12.4 shows the spatial pattern of surface temperature of the oceans. It is a well-known fact that the maximum temperature of the oceans is always at their surfaces because they directly receive the heat from the sun, and the heat is transmitted to the lower sections of the oceans through the process of convection. It results into decrease of temperature with increasing depth, but the rate of decrease is not uniform throughout. The temperature falls very rapidly up to the depth of 200 meter, and thereafter the rate of decrease of temperature is slowed down. Salinity of ocean waters. All waters in nature, whether rainwater or ocean water, contain dissolved mineral salts. Salinity is the term used to define the total content of dissolved salts in seawater. It is calculated as the amount of salt dissolved in 1000 gram of seawater. It is usually expressed as parts per thousand or ppt. Salinity is an important property of seawater. Salinity of 24.7 parts per thousand has been considered as the upper limit to demarcate brackish water. तो ब्रैकिश जो है वो सैलिनिटी से कम सैलाइन होता है, ठीक है, ब्रैकिश वाटर बोलते हैं उसे, जिसका सैलिनिटी 24.7 पार्ट्स पर थाउजेंड होता है. फैक्टर्स उससे कम होता है, ठीक है, वो अपर लिमिट है 24.7 parts per thousand. Factors affecting ocean salinity are mentioned below. The salinity of water in the surface layer of oceans depend mainly on evaporation and precipitation. Surface salinity is greatly influenced in coastal regions by the fresh water flow from rivers, and in polar regions by the process of freezing and thawing of ice. Wind also influences salinity of an area by transferring water to other areas. ठीक है, तो विंड भी इन्फ्लुएंस करता है. सरफेस सैलिनिटी इज ग्रेटली इन्फ्लुएंस कोस्टल रीजन्स बाई फ्रेश वाटर फ्लो, और जो है इवापोरेशन एंड प्रेसिपिटेशन पे ही डिपेंड करता है. The ocean currents contribute to the salinity variation. Salinity, temperature and density of water are interrelated. Hence, any change in the temperature or density influences the salinity of water in an area. Highest salinity in water bodies: Lake Van in Turkey and Dead Sea, Great Salt Lake, etc. Now, horizontal distribution of salinity. The salinity for normal open ocean ranges between 33 parts per thousand and 37 parts per thousand. तो इसके बीच में रहता है. In the landlocked Red Sea, it is as high as 41 parts per thousand, while in this estuaries and the Arctic, the salinity fluctuates from 0 to 35 parts per thousand. Seasonally, in hot and dry regions where evaporation is high, the salinity sometimes reaches to 70 parts per thousand. तो आपको काफ़ी बार कंपैरिजन पूछ लिया जा सकता है कि कुछ सीज का नाम दे दे और वहाँ से आपको बताना है कि किसका सैलिनिटी ज़्यादा है, ठीक है. तो आप कुछ याद रख सकते हो, कुछ फिगर जाती है. यहाँ पर बोला कि रेड सी का जो सैलिनिटी है 41 पार्ट्स पर थाउजेंड है. The salinity variation in the Pacific Ocean is mainly due to its shape and large or aerial extent. Salinity decreases from 35 parts per thousand to 31 parts per thousand on the western parts of the northern hemisphere because of the influx of melted water from the Arctic region. In the same way, after 15 to 20 degrees south, it decreases to 33 parts per thousand. The average salinity of the Atlantic Ocean is around 36 parts per thousand. The highest salinity is recorded between 15 and 20 degree latitudes. Maximum salinity 37 parts per thousand is observed between 20 degree north and 30 degree north and 20 डिग्री वेस्ट एंड 60 डिग्री वेस्ट. तो यहाँ पर देखो जो मैक्सिमम सैलिनिटी हो कहाँ पर ऑब्जर्व किया जाता है 20 डिग्री नॉर्थ से लेकर 30 डिग्री नॉर्थ के बीच, और जो है 20 डिग्री वेस्ट एंड 60 डिग्री वेस्ट के बीच में जो है लोकेट किया जाता है हाइस्ट सैलिनिटी. इट ग्रेजुअली डिक्रीजेज टुवर्ड्स द नॉर्थ. The North Sea, in spite of its location in higher latitudes, records higher salinity due to more saline water brought by the North Atlantic drift. Baltic Sea records low salinity due to influx of river waters in large quantity. तो जो फैक्टर्स आप जब लिखोगे तो इसका एग्जाम्पल आपका जो रीजन हमने पढ़ा ना कि कॉजेज ऑफ सैलिनिटी, तो वहाँ पर ये एग्जाम्पल्स आप डाल सकते हो. नाउ बाल्टिक सी रिकॉर्ड्स लो सैलिनिटी ड्यू टू इनफ्लक्स ऑफ रिवर वाटर्स इन लार्ज क्वांटिटी. द मेडिटेरियन सी रिकॉर्ड्स हायर सैलिनिटी ड्यू टू हाई इवापोरेशन. सैलिनिटी तो अगर आपको कंपैरिजन दे दिया कि मेडिटेरियन सी, बाल्टिक सी और जो नॉर्थ सी, तो सैलिनिटी किसका ज़्यादा होगा, तो ऐसे करके पूछ सकते हैं क्वेश्चन. तो डेफिनेटली यहाँ पर दिखा जा रहा है कि नॉर्थ सी में ज़्यादा होगा, और या फिर बाल्टिक सी है और मेडिटेरियन सी, तो मेडिटेरियन सी में ज़्यादा होगा. सैलिनिटी इज हाउएवर वेरी लो इन ब्लैक सी. तो ये तीन दे दिया मान लो आपको, मेडिटेरियन, ब्लैक सी और बाल्टिक सी. तो हाईएस्ट होगा किसका, मेडिटेरियन का, लोएस्ट होगा ब्लैक सी का. तो ऐसे भी आप क्वालिटेटिव इन्फॉर्मेशन को भी याद रख सकते हो, या फिर क्वान्टिटिव जो एग्जैक्ट है कि सैलिनिटी कितना है उसको भी याद रख सकते हो. बट दोनों ही एटलीस्ट सेकेंड वाला जो है डिफिकल्ट है. ब्लैक सी ड्यू टू एनॉर्मस फ्रेश वाटर इनफ्लक्स बाय रिवर्स. सी द एटलस टू फाइंड आउट द रिवर जॉइनिंग ब्लैक सी. तो ये आपको एटलास के थ्रू मैच करना होगा तो आपको चीज़ें याद रहेगा कि हाँ मेडिटेरियन सी में जो है कोई ज़्यादा कुछ रिवर नहीं है, ये नहीं है कि, या फिर ब्लैक सी में जो है बहुत सारे रिवर्स आके पड़ रहा है तो वहाँ पर जो सैलिनिटी कम होगा, ऐसे करके याद रख सकते हो। द एवरेज सैलिनिटी ऑफ द इंडियन ओशन इज 35 parts per thousand. The low salinity trend is observed in the Bay of Bengal due to influx of river water. On the contrary, the Arabian Sea shows higher salinity due to high evaporation and low influx of fresh water. Figure 12.5 shows the salinity of the world's oceans. Vertical distribution of salinity. Salinity changes with depth, but the way it changes depends upon the location of the sea. Salinity at the surface increases by the loss of water or water to ice or evaporation, or decreased by the input of fresh waters such as from the river. Salinity at depth is very much fixed because there is no way that water is lost or the salt is added. There is a marked difference in the salinity between the surface zones and the deep zones of the ocean. The lower salinity waters rests above the higher salinity dense water. तो सैलिनिटी अगर ज़्यादा होगा तो वाटर डेंस होगा, इसलिए तो हम डेड सी में जाके तैरते हैं, है ना, हम डूब नहीं जाते। तो सैलिनिटी जनरली इंक्रीजेज विथ डेप्थ एंड देयर इज डिस्टिंक्ट जोन कॉल्ड हैलोक्लाइन। तो डेप्थ के साथ साथ सैलिनिटी भी इंक्रीज होता है और सैलिनिटी इंक्रीजेज शार्पली। तो हैलोक्लाइन जोन में जो है, जैसे कि थर्मोक्लाइन में हमने पढ़ा, टेम्परेचर क्या होता है, डिक्लाइन होता है, बट हैलोक्लाइन जोन में क्या होता है, सैलिनिटी इंक्रीजेज शार्पली, क्योंकि डेप्थ के साथ यहाँ पर सैलिनिटी इंक्रीज हो रहा है। तो जहाँ से इंक्रीज होना स्टार्ट होगा उससे हम हैलोक्लाइन बोलेंगे इंस्टेड ऑफ in place of the thermocline. You can compare other factors being constant. Increasing salinity of sea water causes its density to increase. High salinity sea water generally sinks below the lower salinity water. This leads to stratification by salinity. तो ये भी चैप्टर जो है हमारा कंप्लीट हो गया है, ठीक है। अब देखो मूवमेंट्स ऑफ ओशन वाटर। तो जो टाइड्स वेव्स है, एक्चुअली ये मूवमेंट्स ऑफ ओशन वाटर ये चैप्टर के अंदर पढ़ा जाएगा। तो ये चैप्टर नंबर 13 है। तो चलिए इसको भी पढ़ लेते हैं। So the ocean water is dynamic. Its physical characteristics like temperature, salinity, density, and the external forces like of the sun, moon, and the winds influence the movement of ocean water. The horizontal and vertical motions are common in ocean water bodies. The horizontal motion refers to the ocean currents and waves. The vertical motion refers to tides. तो वाटर का जो वर्टिकल मोशन है उसे हम टाइड बोलेंगे, जो हॉरिजॉन्टल मोशन है उसे हम वेव्स बोलेंगे, ठीक ना। जैसे हम विंड के एयर की जो हॉरिजॉन्टल वर्टिकल मूवमेंट हमने पढ़ा था। ओशन करेंट्स आर द कंटिन्यूअस फ्लो ऑफ ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ वाटर इन अ डेफिनिट डायरेक्शन व्हाइल द वेव्स आर द हॉरिजॉन्टल मोशन ऑफ वाटर, ठीक है। तो ओशन करेंट्स क्या है ना, ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ वाटर फ्लो इन अ डेफिनिट डायरेक्शन व्हाइल द वेव्स आर द हॉरिजॉन्टल मोशन ऑफ वाटर। तो क्या डिफरेंस है, कुछ समझ में आया आपको, बताओ कमेंट करके। वाटर मूव्स ahead from one place to another through ocean currents while the water in the waves does not move। तो ये जो पॉइंट है सिग्निफिकेंट है कि ओशन करंट जो है वाटर को डिस्प्लेस कर देता है बट वेव डिस्प्लेस नहीं करता है, बट द वेव्स ट्रेंस मूव अहेड, ठीक है। द वर्टिकल मोशन रेफर्स टू द राइज एंड फॉल ऑफ वाटर इन द ओशंस एंड सीज, जो कि टाइड है, ड्यू टू अट्रैक्शन ऑफ द सन एंड द मून। द ओशन वाटर इज रेज्ड अप एंड फॉल्स डाउन ट्वाइस अ डे। द अपवेलिंग ऑफ कोल्ड वाटर फ्रॉम सबसर्फेस एंड द सिंकिंग ऑफ सरफेस वाटर एंड ऑल्सो फॉर्म्स ऑफ वर्टिकल मोशन ऑफ ओशन वाटर। नाउ वेव्स के बारे में डिटेल में पढ़ेंगे। तो वेव्स आर एक्चुअली द एनर्जी, नॉट द वाटर एज सच, व्हिच मूव्स अक्रॉस द ओशन सरफेस। Water particles only travel in a small circle as a wave passes. Wind provides energy to the waves. Wind causes waves to travel in the ocean and the energy is released on shorelines. The motion of the surface water seldom affects the stagnant deep bottom water of the oceans. As a wave approaches the beach, it slows down. This is due to the friction occurring between the dynamic water and the seafloor, and when the depth of water is less than half the wavelength of the wave, the wave breaks. The largest waves are found in the open oceans. Waves continue to grow larger as they move and absorb energy from the wind. Most of the waves are caused by the wind driving against water. When a breeze of 2 knots or less blows over calm water, small ripples form and grow as the wind speed increases until white caps appear in the breaking waves. Waves may travel thousands of kilometers before rolling ashore, breaking and dissolving as sharp. A wave's size and shape reveal its origin. Steep waves are fairly young ones and are probably formed by local wind. Slow and steady waves originate from faraway places, possibly from another hemisphere. The maximum wave height is determined by the strength of the wind, that is, how long it blows and the area over which it blows in a single direction. Waves travel because wind pushes the water body in its course while gravity pulls the crests of the waves downward. The falling water pushes the former troughs upward and the waves moves to a new position. The actual motion of the water beneath the waves is circular. It indicates that things are carried up and forward as the wave approaches and down and back as it passes. Characteristics of wave. So wave crest and trough. The highest and lowest points of wave are called the crest and the trough respectively. So wave height, it is the vertical distance from the bottom of a trough to the top of a crest or crest of a wave. Wave amplitude, it is one half of the wave height. Wave period, it is merely the time interval between two successive wave crests or troughs as they pass a fixed point. Wave length, it is the horizontal distance between two successive crests. Wave speed, it is the rate at which the wave moves through the water and is measured in knots. Wave frequency, it is the number of waves passing a given point during a 1 second time interval. तो ये चीज़ें हमने पढ़े थे ग्रेजुएशन टाइम में, ठीक है। तो ज़्यादा हम मतलब यहाँ से क्वेश्चन वगैरह क्या ही आएंगे जो कॉन्सेप्ट बेस है वो आपको आ जाएगा। देखो टाइप्स पर हम जाते तो बस एक बार रीडिंग लगा रहा हूँ ताकि जो है पढ़ रहा हूँ तो एक बार कॉम्प्लीशन का सेंस ले लेते हैं, है ना, कॉम्प्लीशन का फीलिंग्स ले लेते हैं बस। और आई होप कि इतने कुछ चीज़ें यहाँ पर समझने के लिए नहीं है, ठीक है। क्योंकि हमारे लिए जो चीज़ें एक बार पढ़ के रखें, अगर आप फर्स्ट टाइम ये सुन रहे हो तो डेफिनेटली आपको चीज़ें जो है अच्छे से समझ में नहीं आएगा। तो आपको बुक के थ्रू पढ़ना है या फिर कॉन्सेप्ट आपको पता होना चाहिए ना, सुन के उतना अच्छे से, या फिर तो फिर आप अदर्स वीडियो कंसल्ट कर सकते हो जहाँ पर आपको एनिमेशन वगैरह के थ्रू अच्छे से एक्सप्लेन किया जाएगा, तो वो वीडियो आपके लिए होगा, ठीक है। यहाँ पर हम जस्ट एनसीईआरटी पढ़ने के लिए ये वीडियोज़ है, ठीक है, एनसीईआरटी पढ़ने के लिए। बस क्या लिखा है एनसीईआरटी में, The periodical rise and fall of the sea level once or twice a day, mainly due to the attraction of the sun and the moon, is called a tide. Movement of water caused by meteorological effects, winds and atmospheric pressure changes are called surges. Surges are not regular like tides. तो सर्जेस देखो एक नया टर्म हमको मिला कि मूवमेंट ऑफ वाटर कॉज्ड बाय मेटीरियोलॉजिकल इफेक्ट, विंड्स एंड एटमॉस्फेरिक प्रेशर चेंजेस, तो उसको हम क्या बोलते हैं, उसको हम सर्ज कहते हैं, not tides. The study of tides is very complex, spatially and temporally, as it has great variations in frequency, magnitude, and height. The moon's gravitational pull to a great extent and to a lesser extent the sun's gravitational pull are the major causes for the occurrence of tides. Another factor is centrifugal force, which is the force that acts to counterbalance the gravity. Together, the gravitational pull and the centrifugal force are responsible for creating the two major tidal bulges on the earth. On the side of the earth facing the moon, a tidal bulge occurs, while on the opposite side, though the gravitational attraction of the moon is less as it is farther away. The centrifugal force causes tidal bulge on the other side. The tide generating force is the difference between these two forces. The gravitational attraction of the moon and the centrifugal force on the surface of the earth nearest the moon pull, or the attractive force of the moon is greater than the centrifugal force, and so there is a net force causing a bulge towards the moon. On the opposite side of the earth, the attractive force is less as it is farther away from the moon. The centrifugal force is dominant, hence there is no net force away from the moon. It creates the second bulge away from the moon. On the surface of the earth, the horizontal tide generating forces are more important than the vertical forces in generating the tidal bulges. तो ये आपको हो गया टाइडल बाल्जेस। देखो सन एंड मून उस साइड है इसलिए बाल्ज हो रहा है, यहाँ पर उल्टा होगा, क्या उल्टा होगा तो सेंट्रीफ्यूगल फोर्स के कारण वहाँ पर जो है टाइडल बाल्ज होगा, तो वही है सेंट्रीफ्यूगल फोर्स के कारण हो सकता है या फिर सन एंड मून के अट्रैक्शन के कारण होगा, तो वही दिखाया गया है। तो दो मेन रीजन रिलेशन बिटवीन ग्रेविटेशनल फोर्स एंड टाइड्स दिखाया गया है और सन एंड मून का जो है वो दिखाया गया है, ठीक है, अट्रैक्शन एंड सेंट्रीफ्यूगल फोर्स। The tidal bulges on wide continental shelves have greater height. When tidal bulges hit and meet oceanic islands, they become low. The shape of bays and estuaries along a coastline can also magnify the intensity of tides. Funnel shaped bays greatly change tidal magnitude. So when the tide is channelized between islands or into bays and estuaries, they are called tidal currents. Tides of Bay of Fundy, कनाडा। तो देखो यूजीसी नेट में ये क्वेश्चन आया था एक बार लास्ट टाइम जो मैंने दिया था कि बे ऑफ फंडी कहाँ लोकेटेड है, कौन सी, मतलब कनाडा ऑप्शन था, ठीक है। तो डेफिनेटली मैंने इसको गलत किया था। द हाइस्ट टाइड्स इन द वर्ल्ड ऑकर इन द बे ऑफ फंडी इन नोवा स्कोटिया, क्योंकि ये सुना सुना था बट वही एग्जाम हॉल में जाकर मतलब है ना, अब भूल गए हैं चीज़ें, वो होता है। The highest tides in the world occur in the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, Canada. The tidal bulge is 15 to 16 meter because there are 2 high tides and 2 low tides every day. Okay. Then a tide must come in within about a 6-hour period. As a rough estimate, the tide rises about 240 centimeter an hour. If you have walked down a beach with a steep cliff alongside, which is common there, make sure you watch the tides. If you walk for about an hour and then notice that the tide is coming in, the water will be over your head before you get back to where you started. तो जाना पड़ेगा बे ऑफ फंडी में एक बार। Now types of tides हम पढ़ेंगे। So tides vary in their frequency, direction and movement from place to place and also from time to time. Tides may be grouped into various types based on their frequency of occurrence in one day or 24 hours or based on their height. Tides based on frequency. Semi-diurnal tide, the most common tidal pattern featuring 2 high tides and 2 low tides each day. The successive high or low tides are approximately of the same height. Then diurnal tide, there is only one high tide and one low tide during each day. The successive high and low tides are approximately of the same height. That is diurnal tide. Diurnal tide, there is only one high tide and one low tide during each day. The successive high and low tides are approximately of the same height. तो हम diurnal बोलेंगे. Mixed tide, tides having variations in height are known as mixed tides. These tides generally occur along the west coast of North America and on many islands of the Pacific Ocean. Tides based on the sun, moon and the earth position. The height of rising water, high tide, varies appreciably depending upon the position of the sun and moon with respect to the earth. Spring tides and neap tides come under this category. तो स्प्रिंग टाइड क्या है, देखो ये दो चीज़ इंपॉर्टेंट है। तो स्प्रिंग टाइड्स द पोजीशन ऑफ बोथ द सन एंड द मून इन रिलेशन टू द अर्थ हैज डायरेक्ट बियरिंग ऑन टाइड हाइट. When the sun, the moon and the earth are in a straight line, the height of the tide will be higher. These are called spring tides and they occur twice a month, one on full moon period and another during new moon period. अब neap tides जो है, normally there is a 7-day interval between the spring tides and neap tides. At this time the sun and moon are at right angles to each other and the forces of the sun and moon need to counteract one another. The moon's attraction, though more than twice as strong as the sun's, is diminished by the countering force of the sun's gravitational pull. Once in a month, when the moon's orbit is closest to the earth, perigee, unusually high and low tides occur. During this time, the tidal range is greater than normal. 2 weeks later, when the moon is farthest from earth, apogee, the moon's gravitational force is limited and the tidal ranges are less than their average heights. When the earth is closest to the sun, perihelion, around 3rd January each year, tidal ranges are also much greater with unusually high and unusually low tides. When the earth is farthest from the sun, aphelion, around 4th July each year, tidal ranges are much less than average. The time between the high tide and low tide when the water level is falling is called the ebb. The time, तो ebb क्या है ना, टाइम है, ठीक है. The time between high tide and low tide when the water level is falling is called ebb. The time between the low tide and the high tide when the tide is rising is called the flow or flood. Okay. Now importance of tides. Since tides are caused by earth, moon, sun positions which are known accurately, the tides can be predicted well in advance. This helps the navigators and fishermen plan their activities. Tidal flows are of great importance in navigation. Tidal heights are very important, especially harbors near rivers and within estuaries having shallow bars at the entrance, which prevent ships and boats from entering into the harbor. Tides are also helpful in distilling the sediments and in removing polluted water from river estuaries. Tides are used to generate electrical power in Canada, France, Russia and China. A 3 megawatt tidal power project at Durga Dwani in Sundarbans of West Bengal is underway. ठीक है, तो ये नाम याद रखना कि कहाँ पर टाइडल पावर प्रोजेक्ट जो इस्टेब्लिश किया जाने का बात कर रहा है पर हो रहा है, तो वो है वेस्ट बंगाल में, सुंदरबन में है. एंड एक्चुअल प्लेस नेम इज दुर्गा द्वानी जो सुंदरबन में है, वेस्ट बंगाल में है. इसका कैपेसिटी क्या होगा, 3 मेगावाट होगा, 3 मेगावाट. ओके. नाउ देखो ओशन करेंट्स की बात करेंगे. ओशन करेंट्स आर लाइक रिवर फ्लो इन ओशंस. They represent a regular volume of water in a definite path and direction. Ocean currents are influenced by two types of forces, namely primary forces that initiate the movement of water, secondary forces that influence the currents to flow. That means keeps the flow continuing. The primary forces that influence the currents are heating by solar energy, wind, gravity, Coriolis force. Heating by solar energy causes the water to expand. This is why near the equator the ocean water is about 8 cm higher in level than in the middle latitudes. This causes a very slight gradient and water tends to flow down the slope. Wind blowing on the surface of the ocean pushes the water to move. Friction between the wind and the water surface affects the movement of the water body in its course. Gravity tends to pull the water down the pile and create gradient variation. The Coriolis force intervenes and causes the water to move to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. These large accumulations of water and the flow around them are called gyres. These produce large circular currents in all the ocean basins. Now, characteristics of ocean currents. So currents are referred to by their drift. Usually the currents are strongest near the surface and may attain speeds over 5 knots. At depth, currents are generally slow with speeds less than 0.5 knots. We refer to the speed of a current as its drift. ठीक है, तो drift क्या है ना, speed of the current को हम drift नाम के बोलते हैं. Drift is measured in terms of knots. The strength of a current refers to the speed of the current. A fast current is considered strong. A current is usually strongest at the surface and decreases in strength and speed with depth. Most currents have speed less than or equal to 5 knots. Most currents have speed of less than or equal to 5 knots. अब देखो, differences in water density affect vertical mobility of ocean currents. Water with high salinity is denser than water with low salinity, and in the same way, cold water is denser than warm water. Denser water tends to sink, while relatively lighter water tends to rise. Cold water ocean currents occur when the cold water at the pole sinks and slowly moves towards the equator. Warm water currents travel out from the equator along the surface, flowing towards the poles to replace the sinking cold water. Now, types of ocean currents. The ocean currents may be classified based on their depth as surface currents and deep water currents. Surface currents constitute about 10% of all the water in the ocean. These waters are the upper 400 meters of the ocean. Deep water currents make up the other 90% of the ocean water. These waters move around the ocean basins due to variations in the density and gravity. Deep waters sink into the deep ocean basins at high latitudes, where the temperatures are cold enough to cause the density to increase. Ocean currents can also be classified based on temperature as cold currents and warm currents. Cold currents bring cold water into warm water areas. These currents are usually found on the west coast of the continents in the low and middle latitudes, true in both hemispheres, and on the east coast in the higher latitudes in the northern hemisphere. Warm currents bring warm water into cold water areas and are usually observed on the east coast of continents in the low and middle latitudes, true in both hemispheres in the northern hemisphere. They are found on the west coast of continents in high latitudes. Major ocean currents की बात करते हैं. Major ocean currents are greatly influenced by the stresses exerted by the prevailing winds on and Coriolis force. The oceanic circulation pattern roughly corresponds to the Earth's atmospheric circulation pattern. The air circulation over the oceans in the middle latitudes is mainly anticyclonic, more pronounced in the southern hemisphere than in the northern hemisphere. The oceanic circulation pattern also corresponds with the same at higher latitudes. जब देखो ओशन currents को दिखाया गया अच्छे से, इसमें आपको आप कंसल्ट कर सकते हो. Where the wind flow is mostly cyclonic, the oceanic circulation follows the pattern. तो ओशन करंट से आपको ये क्वेश्चन पूछा जाएगा कि लोकेशन पूछा जाएगा, ये करंट कहाँ पर है, ये कहाँ पर है, तो वो पूछा जाएगा. कौन सी ओशन में पूछा जा सकता है, या फिर जो नियर बाय लोकेशन है, कंट्री है, वो उसका नाम पूछा जा सकता है, या फिर कोल्ड है या वार्म है, वो भी पूछा जा सकते हैं. तो अच्छे से पढ़ना. मैंने वीडियो बनाया था कि जहाँ से मैंने सविंद्र सिंह की बुक से ये वाटर ओशन करंट को कवर किया था. तो अगर आप सर्च करो फिर आपको मिल जाए तो अच्छा है, देख लेना, या फिर मैं जब प्ले लिस्ट बनाऊँगा तब वो ऐड कर दूँगा यहाँ पर वो वाला वीडियोज़. ठीक है. द ओशनिक सर्कुलेशन फॉलोज दिस पैटर्न. In regions of pronounced monsoonal flow, the monsoon winds influence the current movements. Due to the Coriolis force, the warm currents from low latitudes tend to move to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. The oceanic circulation transports heat from one latitude belt to another in a manner similar to the heat transported by the general circulation of the atmosphere. The cold waters of the Arctic and Antarctic circles move towards warmer water in tropical and equatorial regions, while the warm waters of the lower latitudes move polewards. The major currents in the different oceans are shown in figure 13.3. Prepare a list of currents which are found in Pacific, Atlantic and Indian Oceans. How is the movement of currents influenced by prevailing winds? Give some examples from figure 13.3. So, effects of ocean currents. Ocean currents have a number of direct and indirect influences on human activities. West coast of the continents in tropical and subtropical latitudes, except close to the equator, are bordered by cool waters. Their average temperatures are relatively low with a narrow diurnal and annual ranges. There is fog, but generally the areas are arid. West coast of the continents in the middle and higher latitudes are bordered by the warm waters, which cause a distinct marine climate. They are characterized by cool summers and relatively mild winters with a narrow annual range of temperatures. Warm currents flow parallel to the east coast of the continents in tropical and subtropical latitudes. This results in warm and rainy climates. These areas lie in the western margins of the subtropical anticyclones. The mixing of warm and cold currents help to replenish the oxygen and favor the growth of planktons, the primary food for fish population. The best fishing grounds of the world exist mainly in these mixing zones. तो ऐसे करके ये चैप्टर ख़त्म कर दिया इन्होंने, ठीक है। तो बेसिकली यहाँ पर मैथ के अलावा कुछ तैयार नहीं किया, नो प्रॉब्लम, आप जो है पढ़ लो, या फिर इसी मैप को थ्रू ही आपको बेसिकली चीज़ें याद रखना होगा। जहाँ पर दिखाएगा देखो कोल्ड करंट कौन सी है, वार्म करंट कौन सी है। अब लोकेशन तो आपको दिख रहा है ना मैप को, आप तो मैप तो आपको पता होगा कि ये कौन सी लोकेशन है क्या नहीं है, ये और डिटेल्स में जानना है तो आप सवेंद्र सिंह को रेफर कर सकते हो, या फिर मैंने बोला कि मैंने ऑलरेडी वीडियोज़ बना के रखा है तो वहाँ से आप चेक कर सकते हो, या फिर आप कोई भी वीडियोज़ देख सकते हो। तो हम नेक्स्ट चैप्टर की तरफ जाते हैं, देखते हैं। तो ये देखो यूनिट 6 है जो कि लाइफ ऑन अर्थ है, और आई थिंक ये वाला जो है लास्ट है। और देख लेते हैं एक बार कितना पेजेस और बाकी है। तो देखो 5 पेजेस और मोर है, क्योंकि 131 पेजेस में है हम है और 136 पेज टोटल है। तो चलिए इस चैप्टर को भी कंप्लीट कर लेते हैं इसी वीडियो के अंदर। तो फिर क्लास 11 का जो NCERT है वो बुक खत्म हो जाएगा। Biodiversity and conservation. So this is the last chapter and the 14th chapter of NCERT class 11 geography, physical geography book. You have already learnt about the geomorphic processes, particularly weathering and depth of weathering mantle in different climatic zones. Weathering mantle in different climatic zones. See the figure 5.2 in chapter 5 in order to recapitulate. You should know that this weathering mantle is the basis for the diversity of vegetation and hence the biodiversity. अब देखो ये सी क्यों करने को यहाँ पर ही दे दो ना, तो फिर जो बच्चे आलस है, ठीक है, मतलब जिसका मन नहीं करेगा वो ये पढ़ते पढ़ते उसका एक बार तो उसके सामने आ जाएगा ना चीज़ें, तो फिर उसके लिए आसानी होगा। भाई ऐसे क्यों लिखना है, आपका एक पेज ज़्यादा लगेगा ना, पता नहीं यार क्यों ऐसे करते हो। बाय द वे you should know that this weathering mantle is the basis for the diversity of vegetation and hence the biodiversity. The basic cause for such weathering variations and resultant biodiversity is the input of solar energy and water. No wonder that the areas that are rich in these inputs are the areas of wide spectrum of biodiversity. Biodiversity as we have today is the result of 2.5 to 3.5 billion years of evolution. Before the advent of humans, our earth supported more biodiversity than in any other period. Since the emergence of humans, however, biodiversity has begun a rapid decline. तो मैन आके सारे को खा लिया है नहीं ऐसा नहीं है। With one species after another bearing the brunt of extinction due to overuse. But कुछ ऐसा ही है। The number of species globally vary from 2 million to 100 million, with 10 million being the best estimate. New species are regularly discovered, most of which are yet to be classified. An estimate states that about 40% of freshwater fishes from South America are not classified yet. Tropical forests are very rich in biodiversity. Biodiversity is a system in constant evolution from a viewpoint of species as well as from viewpoint of an individual organism. The average half-life of a species is estimated at between 1 and 4 million years and 99% of the species that have ever lived. तो ये हाफ लाइफ क्या है, ये इसके बारे में पता लगाओ आप। मैंने कभी पहले पढ़ा था बट एग्जैक्ट जो कॉन्सेप्ट है वो याद नहीं है, तो वही ठीक है, फिर से देखना पड़ेगा मेरे को। तो देख लेंगे, आप भी देख लो। एवर लिव्ड ऑन, यहाँ पर बताया भी जा रहा है ना यही तो कि अच्छा नहीं, द एवरेज हाफ लाइफ ऑफ ए स्पीसीज इज एस्टिमेटेड एट बिटवीन 1 and 4 million years and 99% of the species that have ever lived on the earth are today extinct. So biodiversity, हाँ वही कुछ ऐसा ही बोला ना कि the average half life of a species is estimated at between 1 and 4 million years. ठीक है, 1 million से 4 million years तक, and 99% of the species that have ever lived on the earth are today extinct. Biodiversity is not found evenly on the earth. It is consistently richer in the tropics. As one approaches the polar regions, one finds larger and larger populations of fewer and fewer species. Biodiversity itself is a combination of two words. Bio means life and diversity means variety. In simple terms, biodiversity is the number and variety of organisms found within a specified geographic region. It refers to the varieties of plants, animals, and microorganisms, the genes they contain, and the ecosystems they form. It relates to the variability among living organisms on the earth, including the variability within and between the species and that within and between the ecosystems. Biodiversity is our living wealth. It is a result of hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary history. Biodiversity can be discussed at three levels: genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. तो ये देखो अच्छी चीज़ है कि बायोडाइवर्सिटी को भी हम थ्री लेवल में डिवाइड कर सकते हैं: जेनेटिक, स्पीसीज, इकोसिस्टम. नाउ जेनेटिक डाइवर्सिटी. जीन्स आर द बेसिक बिल्डिंग ब्लॉक्स ऑफ वेरियस लाइफ फॉर्म. Genetic biodiversity refers to the variation of genes within species. Groups of individual organisms having certain similarities in their physical characteristics are called species. Human beings genetically belong to the Homo sapiens group and also differ in their characteristics such as height, color, physical appearance, etc. considerably. This is due to genetic diversity. This genetic diversity is essential for a healthy breeding of population of species. Species diversity. This refers to the variety of species. It relates to the number of species in a defined area. The diversity of species can be measured through its richness, abundance, and types. Some areas are more rich in species than others. Areas rich in species diversity are called hotspots of diversity. Ecosystem diversity. You have studied about the ecosystem in the earlier chapter. The broad differences between ecosystem types and the diversity of habitats and ecological processes occurring within each ecosystem type constitute the ecosystem diversity. The boundaries of communities, association of species, and ecosystems are not very rigidly defined. Thus, the demarcation of ecosystem boundaries is difficult and complex. Importance of biodiversity. Biodiversity is contributed in many ways. किसका है? Grassland and Solaj in Indira Gandhi National Park, Annamalai Western Ghats, an example of ecosystem diversity. Importance of biodiversity. Biodiversity has contributed in many ways to the development of human culture, and in turn, human communities have played a major role in shaping the diversity of nature at the genetic, species, and ecological levels. Biodiversity plays the following roles: ecological, economic, and scientific. Ecological role of biodiversity. Species of many kinds perform some function or the other in an ecosystem. Nothing in an ecosystem evolves and sustains without any reason. That means every organism, besides extracting its needs, also contributes something of useful to other organisms. Can you think of the way we humans contribute to the sustenance of ecosystems? Species capture and store energy, produce and decompose organic materials, help to cycle water and nutrients throughout the ecosystems, fix atmospheric gases, and help regulate the climate. These functions are important for ecosystem function and human survival. The more diverse an ecosystem, better are the chances for the species to survive through adversities and attacks, and consequently is more productive. Hence, the loss of species would decrease the ability of the system to maintain itself. Just like a species with a high genetic diversity, an ecosystem with high biodiversity may have a greater chance of adapting to environmental change. In other words, the more the variety of species in an ecosystem, the more stable the ecosystem is likely to be. Economic role of biodiversity. For all humans, biodiversity is an important resource in their day-to-day life. One important part of biodiversity is crop diversity, which is also called agrobiodiversity. Biodiversity is seen as a reservoir of resources to be drawn upon for the manufacture of food, pharmaceutical, and cosmetic products. This concept of biological resources is responsible for the deterioration of biodiversity. At the same time, it is also the origin of new conflicts dealing with rules of division and separation, appropriation of natural resources. Some of the important economic commodities that biodiversity supplies to humankind are food, crops, livestock, forests, fish, medicinal resources, etc. Next point is scientific role of biodiversity. Biodiversity is important because each species can give us some clue as to how life evolved and will continue to evolve. Biodiversity also helps in understanding how life functions and the role of each species in sustaining ecosystems of which we are also a species. This fact must be drawn upon every one of us so that we live and let other species also live their lives. It is our ethical responsibility to consider that each and every species along with us have an intrinsic right to exist. Hence, it is morally wrong to voluntarily cause the extinction of any species. The level of biodiversity is a good indicator of the state of our relationships with other living species. In fact, the concept of biodiversity is an integral part of many human cultures. Loss of biodiversity. Since the last few decades, growth in human population has increased the rate of consumption of natural resources. It has accelerated the loss of species and habitation in different parts of the world. Tropical regions, which occupy only about one-fourth of the total area of the world, contain about three-fourths of the world human population. Overexploitation of resources and deforestation have become rampant to fulfill the needs of large population. As these tropical rainforests contain 50% of the species on the earth, destruction of natural habitats have proved disastrous for the entire biosphere. Natural calamities such as earthquakes, floods, volcanic eruptions, forest fires, droughts, etc. cause damage to the flora and fauna of the earth, bringing change the biodiversity of respective affected regions. Pesticides and other pollutants such as hydrocarbons and toxic heavy metals destroy the weak and sensitive species. Species which are not the natural inhabitants of the local habitat but are introduced into the system are called exotic species. तो ये टर्म याद रखो, एक्सोटिक स्पीसीज क्या होता है कि which are not natural inhabitants of the local habitat but are introduced into the system are called exotic species. There are many examples when a natural biotic community of the ecosystem suffered extensive damage because of the introduction of exotic species. During the last few decades, some animals like tigers, elephants, rhinoceros, crocodiles, minks, and birds were hunted mercilessly by poachers for their horn, tusks, hides, etc. It has resulted in the rendering of certain types of organisms as endangered category. The International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources (IUCN) इसका फुल फॉर्म याद रखो. इंटरनेशनल यूनियन, IUCN means International Union of Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. तो कहीं पर भी फॉर नहीं है, देखो ठीक है, तो ऑफ है सारे. इंटरनेशनल यूनियन ऑफ कंजर्वेशन ऑफ नेचर एंड नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज, एन फॉर नेचर एंड नेचुरल रिसोर्सेज, has classified the threatened species of plants and animals into three categories for the purpose of their conservation. It is endangered species. It includes those species which are in danger of extinction. The IUCN publishes information about endangered species worldwide as the red list of threatened species. तो इसको हम रेड लिस्ट बोलते हैं. और रेड बुक जो है वो क्या है पता लगाओ आप, ठीक है, रेड बुक. तो हम लूसेंट पढ़ रहे थे आज, तो लूसेंट के बारे में मैं कुछ बताऊंगा आपको एंड में या फिर अलग से वीडियो बना के. तो वहाँ पर रेड बुक, ऐसे ये चीज़ें कॉमन है, आप अगर पढ़ रहे हो तो आपको पता है ना. तो रेड लिस्ट और रेड बुक क्या है पता लगाओ. रेड लिस्ट यहाँ पर पता चला जहाँ पर एंडेंजर्ड स्पीसीज या थ्रेटेंड स्पीसीज के बारे में लिस्ट दिया रहता है जो कि IUCN निकालता है. तो रेड पंडा एंड एंडेंजर्ड स्पीसीज है. नाउ वल्नरेबल स्पीसीज, दिस इंक्लूड्स द स्पीसीज व्हिच आर लाइकली टू बी इन डेंजर ऑफ एक्सटिंक्शन इन नियर फ्यूचर इफ द फैक्टर्स थ्रेटनिंग टू देयर एक्सटिंक्शन कंटिन्यू. सर्वाइवल ऑफ दिस स्पीसीज इज नॉट एश्योर्ड एज देयर पॉपुलेशन हैज रिड्यूस्ड ग्रेटली. तो वो वल्नरेबल स्पीसीज है. और एंडेंजर्ड क्या है, जो रेड लिस्ट में जो है दोज इंक्लूड द स्पीसीज व्हिच आर इन डेंजर ऑफ एक्सटिंक्शन, जैसे रेड पांडा. वल्नरेबल क्या है कि लाइकली टू बी इन डेंजर ऑफ एक्सटिंक्शन इन नियर फ्यूचर, ठीक है. तो ये थोड़ा लेस है वल्नरेबल, मतलब वो थ्रेटेंड पहले है, ज़्यादा सीवियर है, उसका कंडीशन ज़्यादा ख़राब है. जो एंडेंजर्ड है उसके नीचे है वल्नरेबल, ऐसे करके. फिर आता है रेयर स्पीसीज. सो पॉपुलेशन ऑफ दिस स्पीसीज इज वेरी स्मॉल इन द वर्ल्ड. दे आर कॉन्फाइंड टू लिमिटेड एरियाज और थिनली स्कैटर्ड ओवर ए वाइडर एरिया. Conservation of biodiversity. Biodiversity is important for human existence. All forms of life are so closely interlinked that disturbance in one gives rise to imbalance in the others. If species of plants and animals become endangered, they cause degradation in the environment, which may threaten human beings' own existence. There is an urgent need to educate people to adopt environment-friendly practices and reorient their activities in such a way that our development is harmonious with other life forms and is sustainable. There is an increasing consciousness of the fact that such conservation with sustainable use is possible only with the involvement and cooperation of local communities and individuals. For this, the development of institutional structures at local levels is necessary. The critical problem is not merely the conservation of species nor the habitat but the continuation of process of conservation. The Government of India, along with 155 other nations, have signed the Convention of Biodiversity at the Earth Summit held at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil in June 1992. The World Conservation Strategy has suggested the following steps for biodiversity conservation. Efforts should be made to preserve the species that are endangered. Prevention of extinction requires proper planning and management. Varieties of food crops, forage plants, timber trees, livestock animals and their wild relatives should be preserved. Each country should identify habitats of wild relatives and ensure their protection. Habitats where species feed, breed, rest, and nurse their young should be safeguarded and protected. International trade in wild plants and animals be regulated. To protect, preserve, and propagate the variety